Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephanie Gray. My title is Head of Waste Management. I work for the Department of Infrastructure, but this isn't specifically a Department of Infrastructure talk tonight. It's based on a lot of information and experience gathered both working on the Isle of Man and away. And what it's intended to do is just give a perspective of some of the issues and challenges that we face on an island. I haven't got the answers. A lot of the answers are out there and they're individual. As an island, we face very different challenges in terms of managing waste than they do in the UK. And hopefully that'll come through today. So yeah, just generally raising awareness, giving you some information, some facts, and hopefully we can have a chat about things at the end. If you have got any questions that I don't know the answer to, I will endeavour to find out. So I've titled it Managing Waste on the Isle of Man, Issues, Challenges and Drivers for Change. I've only got half an hour, so we might not get through to many of the things, but let's have a look. So what is waste? Well, waste is things that we don't want, we don't need, we don't use anymore. It's things that are broken, things that are left over, different names for it: garbage, trash, rubbish, litter, which is just rubbish in the wrong place. And it's important to know that there is a legal definition of waste, and it's something that I've got that I don't want anymore. It might be something that you want, but it's something that I want to get rid of or discard, and that's quite important when looking at the routes for managing waste. So where does it come from? Am I allowed to ask questions? And they can give me an answer rather than just... Where does waste come from? You haven't got to put your hands up, just shout out. Households.
All of us.
Pardon?
All of us.
All of us, absolutely. Because as an island, and I haven't got a specific figure, maybe the Department of Economics will have, we import most of the things that we eat, we use, we wear, we build our house with, we run our industries with, we entertain ourselves with, we do all sorts of things with, and we take back, we export very little of what we produce. We are definitely a net importer. And as we import stuff, it comes in packaging, or it comes with packaging around it, or it comes as something that if it breaks, we have to do something with it. You want to drink a Vimto, it comes in a can. That can is metal, it can be aluminium, it can be steel. You buy a nice flat screen television, it comes with lots of squishy packaging around it in a cardboard box, which then becomes a waste because you didn't buy the cardboard box and the television for the cardboard box, you bought it for the television. So all of this stuff that we bring over, to have the stuff that we want to use or we need to use, whether it's a hospital, whether it's an industry, whether it's government, whether it's a community, will end up at some point becoming a waste. It will either break, it will either run out of its lifetime, or we'll have used it and don't want it anymore. So it is a byproduct of everything that we do in our lifestyles and our economy. It isn't something the Department of Infrastructure creates or government creates, it's something that we all create. And if there's one message, it's something that we should all take responsibility for, thinking sort of holistically and globally. Where does the waste go to that you put in your bin? Well, you'll know if you lived up in the north of the island for long enough. We had Clara 1, 2 and 3, we then had Wrights Pit East. So from until about 2003-04, our waste went into landfill sites. And, you know, compared to the UK, the ones on the Isle of Man were extremely small and localised. The ones in the UK that used to work on were millions and millions of tonnes a year. We think in the north of the island about 2 million tonnes of waste been deposited since 1980. We can't be sure because obviously data collection in those times wasn't very good. But in 2003, 2004, the landfilling stopped. Now that's what the site looks like now. And if you go up there, you know, nature has started to do its thing as nature will. We have seeded it, we've sort of put a cap on it, we've fenced it, we're hoping to work with Manx BirdLife Trust to incorporate it in part of their bird reserve. It looks lovely now, but actually don't forget that underneath of that area we've created an area of contaminated land effectively. That's what landfill sites are. They're a product of the way that we lived our lives in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. And putting it in a hole in the ground then was seen to be the best thing to do. We've gone from having very localised landfill sites where ash pits then became pits full of bits of plastic and things as well, localised around the island, individual local authorities had them, to centralising waste disposal that DOT or Department of Local Government used to operate, Clara 1, 2, 3 and Wrights Pit East, to going, well actually we shouldn't be getting rid of our waste that way anymore, we should be doing something differently with it. So north of the island we've got a lot of closed landfill sites. We have the one active landfill site, Wrights Pit North. We're doing a lot of monitoring up there now. We've got a lot of boreholes installed. We're looking at the impact of those landfill sites and that waste on the groundwater. The orange spots are the areas of high ammonia content. That tends to indicate a high level of reactivity. If you think about food rotting down, it will produce a liquid, a leachate. Over time, many thousands of years, plastic will rot down. Glass tends not to rot down at all, but all the admix of waste that we put in there, the big mixture of industrial and household and commercial waste has been slowly rotting down since we put it in the ground. So we're monitoring the landfill site, we're monitoring the landfill gas and the groundwater, and we're just keeping a track on where that leachate goes. It was designed as a dilute and disperse landfill site, so it should go out to sea. No, that's not ideal, but actually the dilution factor of the Irish Sea is huge, it's significant, and it's not unlike a lot of other landfill sites. But that landfill site is now closed, right spit east. And what we replaced it with was the energy from waste plant. And if you hadn't had a tour around there, I don't know whether anybody's been round. It certainly is worth a visit because it's a very high-tech, well-regulated, extremely well-run piece of kit. And you can have a one-to-one with some really experienced engineers that can give you the answers that I can't. Has anybody been round? Yeah, it's well worth good. It's a good trip. Yeah, informative, yeah. So the energy from waste plant now takes all our what we call residual waste. So it's the waste that we don't put anywhere else. It goes into your black bin or whatever green bin you've got up here. And in terms of data, I don't know whether you can see those. It started off in terms of 2007-8 at about 57,000 tonnes. Now we're down to bubbling along about 51,000 tonnes. The capacity of the plant is 60,000 tonnes, and everyone will go, well, if we recycle everything, we'll have, what we're going to do for the energy from waste plant. Well, actually, the energy from waste plant is designed as a piece of kit to operate 24/7. It does operate 24/7, but 365 days of the year. And if we were in the UK, which we're not, but if we were, there would be multiple energy from waste plants, as there are, around England and Wales. And a local authority, for example, like Ramsey, would have a contract with an energy from waste plant provider, and they'd say, we have X tonnes of waste a year, can we take it to your energy from waste plant? And they go, yes, and there'd be multiple contracts, keeping that plant operating at near on 100%, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, apart from shutdowns. But of course, if something happens at that plant, or when they have downtime, there's another plant along the road that they can take their waste to, or another landfill site which is still operating in the UK. We don't have that as an island. We have to give ourselves enough capacity to have that plant shut down for maintenance, which tends to be about once a year, twice a year. Or if we have an issue of a blockage, that we've got the capacity for storing, because we can't take our waste off island. Legally, under international legislations, we have to be totally responsible for managing the waste that we produce, particularly the residual waste from the bins. There are certain wastes that we can export with permission. We can take away what we call our green list waste, which are like paper, they're non-hazardous. But if we want to take anything away like incinerated bottom ash or end-of-life televisions or batteries because they're hazardous, we have to have permission from the UK authorities to do that. And it's getting more and more difficult now to get those permissions because they're saying to all the jurisdictions, you need to start taking responsibility for the waste that you produce. So we're very unlike the UK. We have an energy from waste plant that deals with a complete mixture of wastes, unlike in the UK, and it would tend to be one single type of waste like household waste. And we have to make sure that we've got capacity for that plant as and when we shut down or if there's a blockage or if there's an issue. So at the moment we're about 51,000 tonnes. The tonnage going through will vary depending on steam pressure and calorific value. The guys at the plant are the ones to talk to about that. But even if we recycled everything from our household waste, and we'll come on to this later, a lot of the things that we're recycling don't burn anyway, so we don't want them in there. So that's energy from waste plant. In terms of waste arisings on island, from our black bins and our skips, about 51,000 tonnes a year residual waste goes to the energy from waste plant. That's Wrights Pit North landfill site. It takes under 1,000 tonnes a year. That tends to be what we call problematic wastes that don't burn. You've got asbestos, you've got fiberglass, you've got plasterboard, and you've got hydrocarbon contaminated soil. So we have to have somewhere to put those. At the moment it's Wrights Pit North, and there are 2 planning applications in to extend the life of that site a bit longer, gives us a chance to build a replacement facility. The other hole in the ground, the landfill site that we operate, is Turkey Land's new quarry. You might see it on the right hand side if you're landing at Ronalds Way. That void is an old limestone quarry which is being filled with inert waste, which is waste that doesn't do anything. It just goes in the ground and it stays there. It tends to be aggregates that can't get recycled, or very thick overburdens that you can't recycle. And half of it's also being used for storing our bottom ash. And we say storing because it's not being disposed of. At the moment, we're extracting it and we're recycling it to try and get the non-ferrous and the ferrous metal out of it. There's a very sophisticated process now. So the processors on island now reworking the bottom ash that we put in there. But that's the hole in the ground at Turkey Land's new quarry. And there are lots of other facilities around the island. DEFRA, and I'm sorry you probably can't read the link, but DEFRA have got their returns reports. They have waste returns that come in from each of their licensed facilities, and they collate that data. And this is just information that's taken from that report that's online if you want to check it out later. From all the waste types on the island, DEFRA are calculating about 56% is reused and recycled. Remember, that will include a lot of construction demolition waste, and these figures are by weight. So obviously C&D waste is quite heavy compared to the likes of aluminium and paper and plastics. About 25% is landfilled, about 14% goes to the energy from waste plant. In terms of specifically household waste, then we have about nearly 80% goes to the energy from waste plant as combustible material. About 15% is reused, recycled or recovered, again by weight, and about 6% sent to landfill. And Norman might be able to tell you what part of the Civic Amenity site actually gets taken to the landfill site. It tends to be plasterboard and aggregates like some broken slates and whatever. That's a very broad overview. So problems with waste, there are a few. Just picked out a few ones that when we talk particularly to students to look at the issue of waste management in a global context, what we pick out. First of all, it is made from raw materials. What is a raw material? It's like the building block of something, isn't it? It's the ingredients of a cake. Everything in this room has got a raw material source. A lot of it will be oil. Ceiling tiles, the carpets, your squishy bits on the chair, the laptops, the chairs over here, anything, my t-shirt, anything that's a polyester, a nylon, is all made from oil because it's all plastic based. We've got some wood as well, and we've got some metal. So all of these are raw materials, and they're things that are dug out of the ground, like sand to make glass, or they are grown like cotton plants to make t-shirts and cotton materials, and then they're made into something else. And some raw materials take millions of years to make, one of which being hydrocarbon, oil. The time the dinosaurs were walking around is when the trees were falling down, getting compressed and turning into oil. And I've got some ores over here if you want to have a look. Because every time you dig things out of the ground, you're using something that we cannot replace. So this is bauxite, this is the bornite, sorry, this is copper ore. And you can just probably see if you have a look later, it's actually quite heavy, so that's a source of copper, the copper wires you see in electrical equipment. We've got some bauxite. Bauxite is the raw material for, anybody know? Aluminium, yeah. So you have to extract a rock and you have to process that using a lot of electricity, a lot of water, a lot of chemicals to get the aluminium out of that. We've got limonite, again an iron ore, and sorry, this is lithium, sorry, this is lepidolite, and then we've got limonite, which is an iron ore. So come and have a look at those later if you want, because they're the building blocks of everything that we use. We dig them out of the ground, and most of these things are non-renewable. So when we're thinking about a global context of our lifestyles, what we're talking about is things that we are using to keep our lifestyle going, that if we just chuck them away and don't recover them and recycle them, we'll have to go somewhere else and dig them out that quarry again. And that quarry is somewhere else in the world, where other people live, where there's a biosphere and an ecosphere and animals and plants and insects. So even though it's not on our doorstep, this quarry to get our copper or the place to get our aluminium from, some part of the world is being impacted. And it's trying to make that connection, I think, as individuals, that's really key. Because on an island, it's very easy just to go out of sight, out of mind. It might not be a conscious thing. It might just be that, okay, we see a sand quarry, but we don't see, many hectares in the desert quarry taking out limonite and taking out iron ore. But some part of the world it will be, and it'll be affecting their infrastructure, it'll be affecting their water and their quality of life. So they're non-renewable, these resources. It's unsustainable, the rate at which we're taking them out. This is particularly interesting at the moment because as we're moving more and more towards a society based on electronics and electronic devices, we're more reliant on what we call these rare earth metals. Lithium will be something that you're aware of because of the push towards electric cars. And the demand for lithium now is acknowledged to be, we're not going to meet the demand for the amount of cars that we've got. And so more and more now companies are going to places like the Atacama Desert in Chile that have salts that contain limonite, lithium, and they're starting to try and extract those, and in doing so they're affecting the water supply of the local farmers. So every action has a consequence. There isn't a golden fix, you know, so I think it's all about, before we make the decisions, let's think through, let's do our research and find things out. And some of these too are from countries where there is conflict going on. Sometimes it's related to slavery, to child labour, and a lot of the companies now producing electronic devices, I mean Apple for one of them, is trying to source their raw materials for their products so they can guarantee there hasn't been any potential impact of a conflict area. You know, it's a big moral question. It's something about corporate social responsibility as well. Second problem with waste we've picked up, every time you dig it out the ground and you process it and turn it into something, we use a huge amount of oil, diesel, hydrocarbon. And when we burn a hydrocarbon, we're producing greenhouse gases. So the process of extracting, particularly things like the bauxite, for example, you use 95% more energy to make a can if you dig it out of a rock than you would if you recycled that can. So it's an absolute no-brainer to get your aluminium back into the recycling scheme. But we tend not to think about that. We tend not to think about the impacts of the actual physical mining or the physical growing of the likes of cotton and turning oil into the likes of polyesters and nylons. So every time we do something with what's in the ground or we've grown it, it has impacts in terms of carbon emissions. And the third problem, it costs money. It costs money. Anything you do with waste, collecting it, managing to dispose of it, will cost money, whether you're a household, a business or a company. And it doesn't just cost money, there's always an environmental impact as well. And that's a difficult thing to put a fiscal value on. Very difficult to put a pound sign on, impacting on how many butterflies are growing somewhere. And that's something that, you know, when I was at university, we were trying to do in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. You know, how valuable is it for ourselves and our future generations of keeping the biosphere as it is and enhancing it and making sure we don't lose it. I think it's something you were talking about early in the report that's come out recently. What value is there in that? It's a difficult one. So the solution, well, it is a solution. It's something that we're trying to aim for. It's something that's been around for a long time. It's the waste hierarchy. It's about getting what we used to think about was just put it all in a hole in the ground and actually push it further up. And this is something that's replicated in our waste strategy, which was done in 2018, and it's going to get reviewed. Can we not make waste? Can we eliminate waste? Can we have a whole day not making waste? Very, very difficult, isn't it? Because our lifestyles are built on getting stuff that comes in a plastic wrapper or a can or a bag. And as much as the big companies now are doing their best, and also because they have to, they're driven by targets in the UK, to change their packaging, to make it more recyclable, it's still packaging, it's still potentially a waste. Changing consumer behaviour. Again, it comes back to it's our decision-making process, isn't it? Can we minimise it? And then that comes back to the companies going, let's use a smaller wrapper on something rather than use a big box with loads of packaging. Preparing it for reuse, recycling it, energy recovery and disposal. So that's the pyramid that we have been working to. And you know, there's been a shift to a circular economy, but effectively that's that hierarchy of how we approach our resources, our raw materials, and the waste that we produce is still there, still valid. Very key, because it's very easy to get confused. Recycling as a definition, this is the legal definition, is any recovery operation by which waste materials are reprocessed into products, materials or substances. So it's getting something, it's breaking it down mechanically, thermally or chemically, and then making it into something else that you can use. So it's a complete loop. So at the moment on the Isle of Man, we have our glass, we grind it down into eco sand, and it goes into a sand product that somebody wants to buy. If you have an aluminium can, it gets crushed, it goes away, it gets smelted, it gets rolled out, it gets used into computer parts or car parts or another can. If it's a plastic bottle, it gets sent away, it gets separated, it gets melted, it gets turned into pellets. Those pellets somebody can buy, because they can then extrude those into a product that somebody will want to buy. It has to be that closed loop. We can't just take things out of the waste stream and then go, well, we've sort of done something to them, but nobody wants that, so how do we get rid of it? And the classic one is green waste. Unless we turn our green waste into a product that somebody wants to buy or use, it's not recycling. And there's a specification, there's a quality standard going with these. So it's not separation from the waste stream. This is what we do over here. We don't recycle on the Isle of Man. We separate our waste out for recycling, and most of that is done in the UK. So we're basically a big separator out and a bulking up and an exporter. It's not reusing, refurbishing, repairing or repurposing. That isn't recycling. That's just fixing things and mending things or using it for something else. And it certainly isn't waste disposal by another name. It's not waste avoidance. It's all about the reason why you recycle something is to keep those raw materials in circulation. It's to reduce the amount of hydrocarbon you're using to get that product. And that product has to be something that other people want to buy and use. So just applying our hierarchy on the Isle of Man, this is what we thought about in terms of doing the waste strategy in 2018. And as I said, this is all up for grabs again. It's being reviewed. In terms of reduction, how much of an effort, given the resources that we have in government particularly, should we go into reducing our waste? Well, the second slide was we import everything. Everything that we have over here tends to come from the UK. And over there is an awful lot more legislation and requirements and targets than we have over here, particularly on big companies who are producers. So they are being forced by their targets, by their customers, by the shareholders, to change their products, to make it easier to reduce the amount of waste that's getting associated with their product. So we will benefit from that by default. So the Easter eggs that come in now are in cardboard boxes. They're far simpler. You've got maybe a wrapping around them. It's a cardboard box rather than this great big thing with plastic around it. Very simplistic example, but we benefit from what's happening in the UK and we will continue to do so. So do we need legislation to do that? Well, I suggest no, because we've got other things that we need to do and we need to focus on. Reusing, I think our current system is working well. Our charity shops are really good. We have men in sheds repurposing. We have small companies now repairing things. We have the set-aside areas. There could be more of them. We have waste swaps and things going on. There's a multitude of things going on the Isle of Man. Does the government need to intervene in the reuse section? Well, I suggest not, because I think the third sector is doing it very well, and the CA sites and so forth. Collecting for recycling. Well, we started some work with the Office of Waste Working Group back in 2016 to do things like baseline waste audits and targeting recyclables. We were looking at options for incentivising householders to separate for recycling, or to amend responsibilities to try and make it that there are economies of scale so that things will work better and work cheaper, because every time you try to send things off island it costs a lot of money. But actually you'll get a better benefit if you have a contract, if you have a bigger amount of material going away. So there are economies of scale that means it's better to work together to go to a recycling point. You know where that recycling point is, you can guarantee it's being recycled, it's not being bulked off and sent up to somewhere in Africa or South America or Thailand to sit in a field. So that's a big piece of work that we were going to do. We haven't taken that forward yet, for lots of reasons, one of which was COVID. But that's still a piece of work that, working with the local authorities, we need to do. Recycling off island, this is key because we collect things for recycling, but if we can't access that UK market because they've changed the legislation or they've said no to us, we're going to struggle. So it's keeping that loop, particularly for hazardous materials, non-incinerable materials. So that's a dialogue that we need to keep having with the UK authorities, because we're still reliant on the markets over there. And the thing that we should focus on, not as an only thing, but certainly as a priority, is making sure that we've got somewhere to get rid of our waste. Because if we have bins overflowing, If we have industries not being able to get rid of their waste, we won't have industries on the Isle of Man, and there'll be an awful lot of problems in terms of public health issues. So a lot of my work is focusing on contracts for the energy from waste plant and contract for the landfill site. To make sure that we've got the capacity not just now, but as we go forward, because these facilities take 9-10 years in the planning to come to the fore, and changing that as well takes a long time. So that's what we thought about in 2018. I still think it's valid in terms of where we target, where DOI targets its resources and its work. Again, you know, we have a new minister, that priority might change as we go along. And what are the drivers to change? Well, just my thoughts. Why bother? Why bother separating out? What's going to do it? Well, legislation, regulations and targets. Everyone says to us, well, make us do it and we'll do it. Yeah, okay, that's one argument, but then there's the other argument about understanding responsibility for materials. So that's something that's been looked at. Do we need to bring in legislation, regulations and mandatory targets for recycling? And how are they applied and what are they tested against? What else drives people? Company policies. So we have a lot of companies on the Isle of Man that have got parent companies in the UK, and they, as part of their businesses in the UK, have mandatory company policies which says you will do this. So that drives their behaviour on the Isle of Man. Business decisions, customers, shareholders and investors, a big one for companies now. People are asking questions. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't we doing this? If I'm going to invest in your company, show me your green credentials. Make sure you're not buying stuff from a third world country or an area where there's a conflict. People are using their money and their votes and their voices now to start to challenge business decisions. And there's things like ISO 14001, which helps, it's basically an auditing tool. It just helps companies manage compliance, reduce waste, improve their, because at the end of the day, waste costs money, whether you overbuy stuff that then becomes leftover, whether you buy stuff and then you spoil it and then it becomes a waste, or whether you have a waste product. And particularly for companies, that's a bottom line issue for them in terms of their productivity and their profits. And is it more cost effective to recycle? Do you actually know how much, I mean, particularly as companies, a lot of people don't actually know how much they pay. They just put their bins out, pay their bills, and they don't even think about it. The financial side of recycling on the Isle of Man is difficult, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but is it more cost effective to actually recycle and dispose of it? So what can we separate out? What can you separate out? The bottom line is I don't know, because I don't know what's in your bin. You know, we need to do baseline waste audits. We need to think about what's in our bin, and then we'll know actually of that, could we actually recycle it on the Isle of Man? What are the organisation policies about greenhouse gas reduction, environmental costs and the benefits of recycling? They will all drive decisions. And what schemes are there? Well, we've got glass to eco-sand. There may be some micro businesses. There was one at one point that took cardboard and turned it into horse bedding, but that's always going to be a bit of a micro business on the Isle of Man. Off island, we export things under TFS. We have paper, we have plastics, metal, hazardous, and batteries. In terms of what's in a bin, well, we did a very large waste audit on the Isle of Man of all household waste in 2006. It's very out of date, it needs updating. We separated, we weighed for many, many weeks. We went through bins, we separated 96 categories of waste out, and that's the resulting pie chart. That was 2007. And that is by weight. And that's quite key when you're looking at some of the lighter materials. So food waste, huge. You know, 25% leftovers. Paper, glass, cardboard. And the sad thing was, even before we did plastics recycling through the curbside scheme, you could recycle glass and paper and cans on island. So we still had a massive amount going to the bin. So there was a problem in terms of communication and education and explaining. And that feedback loop that we had to keep people, giving them confidence that if they put it in their bin for recycling and separating for recycling, it's going to go somewhere, it's going to get recycled. Because all the time we get, oh, it just ends up in the bin, it goes to the energy from waste plant, it goes to a landfill site. And it's just trying to convince people, whatever media you use, that actually, if they go to the effort of doing the recycling, it actually gets recycled. A lot of problem issues there, disposable nappies. I mean, aluminium might not seem a lot, but 1% by weight is a huge amount of aluminium. And like I said before, there are huge energy savings from recycling aluminium. We haven't actually updated that in terms of a household waste audit. The energy from waste plant does do what they call calorific audits. It's only of a very small scale amount of weight. It's about just under a tonne of waste. Again, it just shows you that 2019 and by versus 2022, a lot of wood, a lot of organics, a lot of dense plastics in the waste stream. The we goods are an issue because we means circuit boards, means gold, means silver, means those rare earth metals. We haven't got a we recycling scheme on the Isle of Man. So it all goes through the energy from waste plant, hairdryers, broken straighteners, toothbrushes. We don't recycle our small electrical goods. And that comes out in the bottom ash, which is why we're going back at the moment to reprocess our bottom ash to try and recover some of those metals, but far better if they're taken out at source and then we're exported. But it's expensive. And I don't know whether Norman might refer to it, but when we tried it on the Isle of Man, it needs coordinating, but certainly in terms of our rare earth metals, sustainability, our we goods are something we need to focus on. So what should we target? Well, this is the work we did with the local authorities a few years ago. So in terms of thinking about what if we're going to have targets, what material type should we target? And the questions we asked ourselves was, at the moment, our residual waste goes to the energy from waste plants. So does it burn? Does the waste burn? If it doesn't burn, it shouldn't be going in the bin. If it's glass or a can, why are we putting it in the bin? Because there's no calorific value whatsoever. It should be kept out and recycled. That's the same for copper wiring as well. Does it produce bottom ash? Because if it does, we have to pay to get rid of that, and then we have to pay to get it reprocessed. So it's better if you've got something that produces bottom ash to keep it out of the energy from waste plant. And you know, shiny magazines actually have got a lot of clay fillers inside them, which contributes to bottom ash. It isn't just wood fibres, it's fillers as well. So that paper should be kept out and should be being recycled. Is it hazardous? We don't want hazardous waste in the energy from waste plant, batteries particularly. And we've got a battery collection scheme, dry cell battery scheme on the Isle of Man. So what can we do to encourage people to separate those batteries out in their kitchen and take them to either the co-op or wherever, or down the CA site for recycling? What's the embodied carbon? And if we're looking at the drivers for change as being the climate change targets, then if there's lots of carbon in it, like plastic, because it's a hydrocarbon, then actually it's good to keep that out of the energy from waste plant and recycle it, so we can keep that carbon in circulation. Yes, it will burn, but can we recycle it more? Is it a non-renewable resource? Because if it's a non-renewable resource and it goes in the energy from waste plant, sure as eggs, it's not coming out again. And we're going to have to go back potentially and start digging out more rocks. And is there a fiscal value in recycling? You know, is it worth a lot of money? We get quite a good amount of money for our bring back paper. It sort of helps offset the costs for everything else. But because we've got a good company in the UK that takes it, because it's a guaranteed waste stream, because it's a quality material, and that's really key, it's not contaminated. We can send it away, we get a good price for it at the gate fee, and that helps us offset our other costs. Just looking very quickly at the carbon impact, because this tends to be where there's a focus at the moment for our waste streams and our activities on island. Lots of bar charts there. Basically, the bar charts are the amount of waste. You've got paper and cardboard on the left, and you've got household mixed waste on the right. And the diamonds are the carbon impact of producing and then getting rid of that material. And the big surprise for me, and I don't know why because I should have thought about it, was the textile waste triangle is right up there at the top. So if you produce textiles, if you manufacture them, take all the raw ingredients, do all the washing, do all the chemicals, do all the production, do all the transportation, sell it, somebody uses it, and then they put it in the bin and it goes to the energy from waste plant, all of that carbon that's gone into making that textile is lost. So what this is saying, and it's very rudimentary and it needs a lot more work doing it, but we did an initial work with the carbon metric with Zero Waste Scotland, was actually plastics and textiles are the two things we need to be looking at in terms of our carbon content in our waste stream if we're looking at carbon emissions. And you know, we hear a lot now about textiles and the waste swaps and you know, loving your clothes a bit longer and buying good quality clothes that last a bit longer and not going for the one season change of a fashion item and then putting it in the bin or trying to get rid of it. So what is the way forward? Well, my thoughts only, you know, we need data. We need to know what we're dealing with. We need a waste composition analysis by individual sector and certainly by households, because if we're looking at targets for household waste recycling, there's no point setting a target for aluminium if everyone's recycling their aluminium already. We need to look at other things, maybe like textiles and maybe like the glass and so forth. We need an all-island focus. We're 85,000 people living on an Isle of Man. We're the size of a small town in the UK. I used to work in Cheshire. It was well over 1 million people. It's much better. We're stronger when we work together. We can achieve more when we work together. You achieve more because you have a system that everyone understands. It's the same system across the island. You can maybe have a shared contract for exporting. You'll get better value for that. You can be certain of where that's going. It ticks lots of boxes, and I understand the reasons why it isn't at the moment. So looking at the delivery mechanism for recycling as well and waste management. Financing is a big thing, and I think maybe the CA site will pick it up more than anything else. If you take your television to a CA site, you'll get charged for it. And everybody constantly complains, well, you know, it's paid for by the producer in the UK. They pay to have, they pay to have a recycling scheme to take their old televisions back. We bought the same television on the Isle of Man. Why is it costing us money? Well, the bottom line is it's because we're the Isle of Man. You know, we've spoken to the UK numerous times, you know, can we access the free take-back schemes for fridges, for computers, for televisions? Can we get the packaging recovery notes for the things that we're recycling? Can we get the recycling credits? The answer is no, we can't. And it's just, as I said, it's a product of the fact that we're an independent legal jurisdiction, and Jersey and Guernsey are exactly the same. So there is a cost impact and a cost effect of us taking certain materials back, and we can't be compared to the UK because we're not the same. In terms of manufacturing on island, obviously we're not going to have people coming over to invest and build and do business over here if they can't get rid of their wastes. There's big programs to do with Chamber of Commerce, waste prevention, eco-design and waste swaps, linking businesses. You know, what's somebody else's waste might become somebody else's raw material. This is what we're looking to do. We're looking to push the change up the hierarchy to let's not make it, can we recycle it? And that will require investment, both in time and money and infrastructure on the Isle of Man. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we can decide as an island, well, you know, as has been quoted many times before, we're only 85,000 people. What difference does it make? And, you know, you could say, well, you're right. But at some point, for me, what drives it is actually that we are individual human beings living on the planet. And we are using a lot of the resources, we are having an impact. And you know, personally, I need to do what I can to try and reduce that impact. And if it's through waste management or what I purchase, then for me, it's a personal decision. That's what I try to do. So that's the end of the presentation anyway. And we're going to do questions later. Is that okay? Norman, I think you've got a clicker.
I'm sorry, I can't follow all that sort of presentation. I'm just going to talk a wee while. Hopefully very, very quickly. First thing, just a bit of history. When I came back to the Isle of Man from working in the UK, it must be nearly 40 years ago, what was called the Civic community site then was down Cannell. I was living in Andrews, and if you're green waste and so on, you had to drag it down to the point of air and so on. Roughly about 2010, they started planning it for Balladewell. That was completed, I think, at the end of 2011 and commissioned early 2012. From then on, it was run by the government until March 2017. And that's when 7 parishes from the north, there was Andrews, there was Bride, Ballaugh, Derby, Garth from Mackleton, Lezayre, and ourselves and Ramsey. We took on the running of that civic community site. We've been doing it now, say, since the 1st of April 2017. So, you know, 5.5 years. In that time, initially for the first couple of years, I was more involved in the sort of management side. Latterly, I'm filling in for Barbara Wallace, by the way, here, who's on leave this week. She is now taking on the more managerial role in that. But Ramsey Commissioners are basically doing the day-to-day running of the site. The actual management is by the 7 parishes. So Ramsey take the day-to-day sort of decisions, but the major decisions of like buying new equipment and so on, is done by the 7 parishes. The cost of running the site is split between those 7 parishes, and it's all rate borne, unfortunately. So it's the ratepayers who are paying for the actual running of the site. Right, well, what happens out there? Obviously, quite a lot when you think about it. There are, as far as we're concerned, there are 3 main types of waste that we can accept. We have a waste licence. It was issued by DEFA, by the government. We class them as 3 main. We class it as recyclable, but as Stephanie said, we don't recycle. What we do is separate, because we can't recycle on the Isle of Man. So we are separating categories of waste, and then it's being transported, A, to Douglas, and then B, usually to the UK for recycling. So we are just collecting, separating out. Next one is burnable. That's basically your household stuff. And that goes to the energy from waste plant. And then the last category we got, the smallest one, luckily, is for landfill. And that goes down to Wrights Pit North, again up at Cannell. So we got examples. Now, we use the word recycle, but again, I'll try and use separation. We have things like, you got your green waste, so we separate that out. You'll have your rubble, your builder's rubble. We try and separate that as best we can. If we can't, we'll give it to a local person, like Birchells or Corlets. They'll separate it out for us into categories, which can be then reused elsewhere. You've also got your scrap metal, you've got your TVs, you've got your white goods, you've got computers, your plastics, your cans, your paper, your glass, those sort of basic things. You've got oil, you've got a waste oil container out there. So light bulbs, clothing, we try and take as much as possible. We used to have a wood recycling cage out there where we were hoping that the public would put wood of a good standard, could be put in there, somebody who would need it or want it could take it and reuse it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, because what was ending up happening is people would be putting anything in there. So you'd find wood in there, you'd find MDF in there, you'd find rotten wood in there, which couldn't be used by anybody. And we found that the guys at the site would end up having to clean out this cage and put it in the wood skip. So we haven't done that for a wee while now. Everything tends to go into our wood skip, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, or whatever. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it has progressed over the last few years. Obviously, your burnable, you've got your household stuff, you've got your cardboard, unfortunately. And now we also have our wood, which is classed as burnable and goes to the energy from waste plant as well. The landfill from our thing is mainly plasterboard. So we try and separate out our rubble as best we can, but plasterboard, that's got to be going to landfill, unfortunately, and tends to go down to Wrights Pit North. Under our waste licence, there are certain things that we cannot or don't accept. Things like, you've got vehicle tyres, you've got asbestos, you've got chemicals. Now, we haven't got the facilities out there to deal with those, so we don't accept those. We don't accept commercial waste, or we try not to. We try and, get it down to a very, very bare minimum if we can, because we don't want to be in competition with local people who collect that commercial thing, like Birchells, like Corlets, like Paul Carey and so on. We don't want to be in competition with those. That's their business. We're not there for a business. We're there to provide a public service as best we can. That's the way we view it. That's the way the joint committee of the 7 parishes view it. We want to provide a public service rather than be in competition to businesses. We don't allow, I know it's going to cause problems, it does cause problems, the reuse of small electrical goods. The problem is the safety element. People could deposit kettles or those little bits and pieces in the reuse centre out there. People could take them away. Then if it's not safe, you can end up with a fire in the house. So the committee as such took a decision that we will not accept small electrical goods in the reuse for people to take away again, just because we don't want to be responsible if they end up being slightly dangerous, not safe. You can cause fires in people's houses, and that's the last thing that we want to do. What we will tend to do, and it's also the case for dishwashers and so on, we will try and break it up as much as possible. We will take plugs off, we'll take cables off, we'll take motors out of them, and we'll give those to either Birchalls or Costains for them to recycle. So we will break things down into components which can be used elsewhere or sold for scrap and so on. Right, where does all this waste go? Well, obviously, Stephanie said the household stuff, the cardboard, the wood, the oils, that will go up to the energy from waste unit. Our green waste, that goes mainly to Ballinevan in St John's for composting. Our rubble tends to go to Birchalls where they'll separate and so on. Scrap goes to Birchalls, and that is actually an income source for the site. But scrap is very, very variable in its value. Sometimes it can be down to £20–30 per tonne. Other times it can be £120 per tonne. So it's a variable source of income, but it's a generous source of income for the site. It goes to subsidise the rates we all have to pay. Plastics, at the moment, it's being picked up by a firm called Man Waste Recycling. They take it away, they'll chip it, and unfortunately, again, it has to be taken away to the UK for recycling over there. Batteries, car batteries mainly, they'll go to Costains for, again, it's an income source for the site. They'll give us money for those, but again, they have to be sold or taken to Germany to be recycled. Light bulbs, City Electrical Factors take them. They charge us for for taking it, but they do take all the tubes and the light bulbs from the site and so on. And we don't charge anybody. Some civic community sites will charge so many pence per light bulb. We at the Northern thing have never ever done that. Because the problem you end up getting with somebody a bit like sort of butterfinger. Oh dear, that's dropped. Oh, I've saved myself 35 pence there. It does happen. It has happened. Not at our site, because we don't charge. But we have heard from other sites that that sort of thing does happen. People suddenly drop things to avoid having to pay for it. Any unused books are now being picked up by Samaritans, which is a big help for us, because they can use it out and, sort of pass those around various places and so on. The milk cartons, I assume they go back to the creamery. But again, personally what I do, I flatten mine as much as possible. You go out there, you open the thing, and you see all this sort of full car. All you're doing is really transporting air. I would encourage anybody who does it, flatten them and put it in there. Because if you can flatten them, you got more in a confined space, you got less transport of them. Or less transport, more, it's still the same weight, but, you're doing it less often if you do it that way.
Nightmare to get in the bags if they're full of air.
Yes. Plasterboard, as I said, that goes down to landfill. Then we got our bring bank elements, which have been organised by the government and so on. You got your glass, which they go to courts for crushing and reuse. You got your paper, and we got cans for recycling. TV and white goods, yes, we have to charge because we get charged. I'll come on to sort of education in a minute. That's a bit of a bugbear with a lot of people having to pay for their disposal, but we have to pay for the disposal as well. So we try and recuperate what we can from the general public. I could have done a thing here as regards weights, how many tons have gone through the site and how much of that have we separated out to be recycled. So we started in 2017, 2018. The total tonnage that went through the site then was 3,517 tons in a year. Out of that, we separated out for recycling 2,074 tons, and that was about 59%. They have been on a par. It actually increased the next 2 years up to, in 2019, 2020, to 3,849,000 tons. And we recycled 58% then. So overall, between the 1st of April 2017 and the 30th of September 2022, we've accepted 18,572 tonnes of waste through the civic community. And we've separated out 10,526 tonnes, which again works out on average about 57%. But a lot of weight. You got, obviously your biggest weight is going to be your green waste, because that's very, very heavy, but that is recycled. You've got your household burnable, which goes up to the energy from waste, and you've got your wood. They are the three main or heaviest sections of waste. Just go out talking about TVs and that sort of thing. Our average disposal over the years, this is generally the number of TVs that will be deposited out there, you're talking about 460 per year. Computers, about 125 per year. And then fridges, you're talking 390 per year. And that's over a 5.5 year period. So you're talking, several thousand items through that site over the last 5.5 years. What challenges do we have? Well, obviously, the site's been going now since 2012, so it's 10 years old. People are becoming more and more aware of the need, or in my opinion, the need to recycle. So at this stage, in my opinion, the site is too small. We haven't got enough space. We could do with a bigger site, because if we did, we could consider recycling cardboard for one. But to do that, we'd need a baler. And to do it, we'd need somewhere to be able to store it, because it's not worth baling it and then leaving outside to get wet and soggy. So we need somewhere to actually put it dry, and then before the next, or before we can actually take it or get it taken away for recycling elsewhere. If we had more space, we could separate out our rubble. So we could have a skip for soil, a skip for good rubble, and a skip for rubbish rubble, like your bits and pieces of glass and windows and that sort of thing. At the moment, we just haven't got the space to be able to do that. So our rubble has to go to someone else who has the ability to separate it out. So if we had more space, we could do more. Obviously, costs are a big downer for us. We are the furthest site away from the energy from waste unit. So we have to transport our burnable waste the furthest. And at the moment, each haulage trip costs us £133. That's every single trip. Yes, we can get a few tons in a skip. And then when it gets to the energy from waste, the cost is about 97, 99, I can't remember that area, that 97 to 99 pounds per tonne to burn. So we have to incur those costs. Wood at the moment, it has been subsidised, thank you very much, down to £35 a tonne, but unfortunately for everybody costs are going up. The wood next April will be the same cost as the burnable. So we have to budget for that for next year's costings. Our rent, again, the government have subsidised us out there over the last 5 years. The normal rent would have been £20,000 per year. They've allowed us to build that up over a period of 5 years. So the first year was 4,000, 8,000, 12, 16, and now we're on our, we've passed our 5th year, so we are now paying the full rent. But by having that lead in over the 5 years has been a big help to us managing the costs out there. A bigger problem, I think, and you sort of chipped on it a little bit, is the education of the public. The vast majority are aware, but you'll always get some who just want to turn up, get rid of their waste and go. And if there isn't a parking space by the skip they need to put their waste in, they'll put it in another skip. So you'll end up with wood in the burnable. Yeah, it's burnable, but if it goes in the burnable skip, it costs us £97 a tonne to get rid of. If it's in the wood one, it's £35. You get some people who don't want to pay for their white goods or their TVs or their thing. They will wrap it up in something and then put it in a skip. We're talking about a very, very small minority, but it does happen, unfortunately. Now, it's a responsibility, and again, you talk about responsibility. We all have to have a responsibility. It's all costing more and more, and recycling is a very, very expensive thing to do. It's going to cost us more and more. Some people, again, size of the waste. Some people try and bring big, huge things where they struggle or can't get it out of their vehicle, but expect us to accept it. And sorry, if you have some people come out with big sort of logs and branches or huge big things. Well, can you take the home, chop it up, and then we'll accept it into smaller things, which then our person we give it to, they are happy to accept it. But if you get a big branch or a big, huge, big sort of log, they're going to struggle to get rid of it as well. But people do try to leave things with us for us to deal with, on their behalf. These are challenges. Another one we got is, say, we have said disguising waste, to wrap it up and shove it in, all sorts of things. This is just one, it's a bit of a bugbear for me, is I work downstairs in the commissions here, and we do or have, again, it's a very, very small minority, people complaining about the timing of the closure of the site. Now, we have a time limit there of should be 15 minutes from arriving to disappearing. Some people just in, jump and gone, not a problem. But some people have a lot of waste. They have to take time to unload their vehicles, which is fine. We have to give our guys a lunch break and we close at 4:30. We can't close the gates at 4:30 and then let people in to empty their vehicles. So we have to close the gate 15 minutes before the site is officially closed. That then gives somebody who's just come in that 15-minute gap to empty their vehicle. But some people come in, oh, it's 20 past 4. You don't close till 4:30. Yeah, but we expect you here at 4:15, so you've got 15 minutes to empty your vehicle, and then we'll lock the gates at 4:30. A few people can't register that, and then they start to abuse the staff, which is unfortunate, because all they're doing is doing their job. They're trying, to help the general public to deposit their waste. If they do see people struggling, they will do their best to help them. Now, I know Clara said you've got people who are disabled and struggle and so on. And if people come out there, they're able to get a lift and they have some heavy goods, and people do have heavy things, then sure, our staff will do their damnedest to help them out. But education is a big problem, I think, overall for waste disposal, but also for just generally treating the staff and the facility to use it to its best ability. And I'm afraid that's all I've got. But any questions, I'm happy to answer later.
Question. Why don't you say that you close at 3:45?
On a Friday, they shut at 4. But normally it's 4:30.
Right. So people have got half an hour.
No, so the gates will be closed at 3:45
Oh, right. Okay.
for stopping people coming in. The site officially closes at 4 o'clock.
But they should have on the website the time that they closed is before the time, by the time you don't want any more people arriving.
Well,
I do agree.
Yes.
I find
Because
it
it's
rather
confusing.
confusing.
Yeah.
It is
Every time
confusing.
I'm like, is it 4:15? Is it 4 o'clock? What time am I meant to be there? I just want to know, what time does the gate close?
What time do they want me to leave?
Yeah.
But the problem is closing. The gate is closed, the site is closed, and there's 2 times for that.
Yeah.
Why? Why do we need to know when they close? We only need to know when we can't.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
I'll take that on board.
Yeah. I think if we knew
Yeah.
the gate closes at 4 p.m, after 4 p.m. you're not going to get in.
Yeah.
But when it's like, is it 15 minutes before or was it half an hour before? Every time I still go all the time and I still get it confused. So I do
Still doesn't learn, is what
No,
she's saying.
Still learn every time.
Well, we're going to have a seat so we can bring in Stephanie and Norman and also Clara and Louise as well.
Yeah, I'm
And then we'll take it.
thinking to your time.
No, we're all going to sit down.
All right.
We'll take
All together.
Oh, squad normal.
I thought Clara was going to give a presentation, but never mind.
Don't rope me into a presentation. I thought I got away with that. Yeah.
Do you want to just give a quick introduction?
Yeah. Hi everybody, my name's Clara Isaac, and in April 2021 I decided to do the crazy thing and move my career in finance, my 13-year career in finance, to pursue a passion for the environment and sustainability, and to roll out a curbside recycling collection scheme across the Isle of Man, something that was completely bananas and people thought I was bananas, and I am bananas. And we're now a year and a month down the line. It's had incredible success. It's really starting to gain traction. But also, as Norman was saying, we're really pushing to improve education, people's understanding of recycling. It's been a crazy year, but we're hoping that what we've kind of managed to achieve, which hasn't been easy, it has been extremely difficult. We have faced, incredible challenges, but with kind of our expertise and our background, we thought, right, this is what we can do. Can we kind of take what we're good at and pursue our passion and help the Isle of Man and our kind of feature of sustainability. And that's what we're trying to achieve at the moment, and so far to great success, but definitely there's a wider message to spread out there. And yeah, I'd love to welcome any questions you have about our scheme, and we'll have a great successful collection in Ramsey. Such a great take up in Ramsey, thank you very much. And we've been collecting in Ramsey now for a year. So it's certainly picking up traction, and if anyone hasn't heard about it, I'm really sorry. I'm trying so hard and I love talking, but getting the message out there has certainly been our greatest obstacle, but would welcome any questions that you have about it. Nice to meet you all as well.
Clara, for that short outline of what's happening with Recycle Collect. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Just pop your hand up and ask, is it directed to everybody or anybody? Joe, kick off.
Just so that everybody in the room knows, couriers will take your television for nothing.
Yeah.
There's no need for anybody to pay for it. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is, to my lady colleague on the end there, your amenity side.
Yep.
When people have emptied their car, if you get them to move them instead of wandering across the other side and spending 20 minutes wandering around the shed while they're blocking the skips, that could be very useful.
It could be, and the problem is, well, it's not a problem, but again, it's the education side. The whole idea is that,
Well, I'm trying to educate you.
yes, I know, anybody who should use the site shouldn't be on the site for more than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Anybody. Now, we have to have 2 people on site at all times per our waste licence. Now, yes, it'd be nice if they could be around about all of the time, but you get some of the guys working the machinery. Ideally, we would have one sort of working machinery and one on the top half of the site. When he's not working the machinery, it should be up both on the top half of the site, sort of supervising people and so on. That doesn't always work. It'd be nice if that would happen every single time, but unfortunately it doesn't.
Well, I've asked your staff, when people have stood there talking, I've gone to your staff and said, they've emptied their cars, they've stood there talking, they've been there 5 minutes already, can you ask them to move? And they won't do it.
Yeah. A lot of people go out there and see it as a social gathering as well. They do.
Thanks, Joe.
I think that the wood, planks of wood label needs to be absolutely clear. Nothing else except planks of wood. Fresh, good planks of wood. Because
We
I'm
tried
standing
that.
there like this,
We tried. The cage as you go around the first corner. That was the whole idea. A cage there with. Initially, it was going to be a lockable door, but then we decided no. If you can have our guys are going to have to come and open it and so on every single time. So we'll leave it unlocked. But it was a case of right. Let's put good, decent wood in there so people can take it away as they want.
It's about labelling though, because the other one says wood and then lists a whole load of various different types of wood. But if one of them didn't say wood, one of them said other things like wood, and then the other one said only good planks. It's so clear, and if you want to educate everyone, then they're only going to visit maybe twice a year, so they need that you're going to educate everyone on the island.
But if we just use the skip for the collection of the wood, we don't want people skip dipping, as we call it, because that's dangerous. You can see some oops, and we got an individual in the skip, never mind the wood. So we try not to do that. That was the whole idea of having that cage there. So that could be taken and reused. And any dubious, rotten or other wood would go in the actual skip, because you don't want people sort of skip dipping. But it didn't really work, unfortunately.
So I really love the Northern Civic Community site. It's one of my favourite places to go. And I have noticed in the last couple of years it's been less enjoyable and fruitful because of the lack of small electronic goods and cables and other things like that. which made it, most enjoyable when you'd find something good. In charity shops around the island, they sell electrical goods, and I don't believe they go through any kind of testing. I may be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure that they don't. Do they all?
I don't know all of them, but I have
Yeah, I think they have to
Yeah.
pat test them.
Do they have to test them all?
I'm not sure if they have to, but it's certainly sensible.
That would be the sensible thing, and we decided, the joint committees of the 7 parishes decided, no, we're not going to pat test everything, and for safety reasons we would not encourage people to leave small electrical goods in the reuse.
Is there not the potential, though, to pass on responsibility to those individuals, both leaving and taking?
You can put as many signs up as you potentially want, but if anything, in our opinion, if anything did happen, where'd you get, got that from the civic community? And,
buyer beware.
I mean, has there been any cases of lawsuits?
no, but
where,
we don't want we don't want to encourage any either.
Right, okay.
It's such a fruitful place. I mean, they call it Harrods in the local
Yeah.
community centre.
Yes.
And it's such a wonderful thing to be able to find stuff without having to spend absolute tons of money on, a sandwich machine, a kettle, all these things. But if you had maybe just one person there just testing all the stuff before it goes out. I know it's a whole job and it's probably a lot of money, but if there was maybe even a small donations box, people could, I don't know, it's too much, not enough room.
Surely if
Maureen-
somebody picks them up, somebody takes an electrical good from them.
Maureen, he will back me up. The costs of running the site for a year are over 400,000.
But if somebody took a hair dryer, they'd know they should be able to get either their electrician or take a chance.
They should, but would they? Do they? But
I think we live in a very litigious age
Yeah.
these days, and
a couple of years ago,
Can we open it up a little bit to the more general sort of side of recycling and what, from an environmental point of view, we're hoping to get to?
Somebody define
Um,
plastics. The word plastics has been used quite a lot tonight. Anyway, so can somebody clarify to me what can be recycled on this island?
From our perspective, Steph will be able to tell you a bit different from Bring Bank scheme, but from Recycle Collect perspective, something we're like super open about is, when you look at the bottom of plastics, it's never easy, it's a pain. But if you turn them over, there's like a little triangle and it'll say like a number 1 in it, a number 2 or a number 5. And what we do with our customers is we say, okay, this is what we can take. If you're unsure, put it in your box when you're sorting your recycling, we'll pop it back in the box and we'll leave a little note on their account to say, we're so sorry we couldn't take that, it's because it doesn't meet the requirements. And then people will sometimes get in touch being like, oh, I couldn't put in, my cling film, why? And, soft plastics recycling is a tricky and more complex situation. And so for us, we can only take very specific plastics which have a destination, essentially. But in terms of Bring Banks,
The Bring Banks don't do plastics. Essentially, when we started the curbside recycling scheme in 2008, that's when we introduced plastic recycling to the CA sites. The reason it was CA sites was because we could actually have the volume of bins there to take bottles. As talking about cardboard containers, Tetra Packs, effectively what you're transporting is air. So you need to be able to compact those down. The CA sites have taken over responsibility now. So we started off with HDP and PET, which is a 1 and a 2. The reason being that there were reprocessors in the UK that would take those materials mixed, and we could guarantee they were getting recycled in the UK in the northwest of England. Because when we started doing the scheme, what we wanted to do was reduce the environmental impact of transportation and also guarantee that we knew where they were going to. And obviously the boat goes to Heysham, and our closest markets are the borders and northwest of England. So we managed to source recycling facilities there to save us hauling all the way down to Cornwall or knowing that the material was going to go further abroad, maybe to China particularly. There was a big export market for plastics to China, and then Thailand. That's changed now because of the regulations internationally. So there's an obligation to know where material is going. As I said, in the northwest we knew there was processors there, so we targeted 1 and 2. I think it's become a bit more expansive now. They can take types 5. Plastics is a nightmare, let's be honest. There are so many different types. One product can have 4 different types of plastic in it. That's something that's changing now with that top strap line of reducing the types of waste. Manufacturers are realising now that if you have a plastic bottle and you have a wrap on it and you have a lid and there are 3 types of plastic, it makes it very, very difficult to recycle. So the producers now are looking at trying to simplify things and make it one type of material that can be recycled. And like I said, everything we ship off island costs money. And there's an environmental impact to that. And if you send something away in a load that's contaminated, there's a risk that load will get to the UK and get rejected, or that it will cost you money to get it decontaminated. So source separation on island is really good. We've managed it with our paper, which is why we get the very good income we do, because it's really good quality. But if you start to mix in things like hand towels, like Tetra Packs, the mill we take our material to, that's contamination, we can't take it.
So educate me now anyway. So what can I put in my little container at home that I can take up to Ramsey, up to Valladolid?
I don't know what to Valladolid take.
We tend to take most things, because man waste who take the plastics from us, they tend to chip it. On island, I think they do.
It'd be the same, I think, the 1, the 2 and the 5.
Yeah.
I don't know if Man Waste take the soft plastic recycling.
The co-op are taking them now.
So, I know there's a co-op now. If you go on the door and the outside, the soft plastics, they've got a little container there where you can put your soft plastics in.
I think it's really important that there are very specific plastics that we can recycle, and as Steph was saying, they do have great channels. But I think as a community, we all need to be really driving the reduction in plastic, especially soft plastic, buying it where we don't need to. If we can source an alternative, I think that's a great option. And as Steph was saying, the suppliers, there's UK plastic packs where people are really driving that reduction in plastic across all of their products. And I think as consumers, and I hate the word consumers, but as consumers, we can do that ourselves by diverting our attention away from those kind of, the broccoli with the hopeless cling film on it and things like that, buying like loose vegetables and stuff.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, just a quick question. Which, when you look underneath, which of those plastics are in fact more recyclable than others?
So they can be so confusing, because some companies like Tesco's and stuff, they have a bring back recycle scheme, and so you'll see this triangle. I'll just say recycle on it, but actually it's technically a soft plastic. It's a mix of multiple plastics which you can't really, for local authorities, have collected. But for Tesco's perspective, it is recyclable. So what I'd really encourage is specifically look for the little triangle, and it'll have a number 1, a number 2 or a number 5 in it. If it just says recycle on it, I would ask the supplier, where do you recycle? And I'd noticed that Marks and Spencer's now started making the triangle really big, because you have to have your glasses on to see what these triangles are. They're a nightmare. But yeah, that's definitely one that we're super careful at Recycle Collect, is just checking. And you start to know as well. Do you know, when you pick something up now, you pick a salad pot up from Marks and Spencer's, or actually you pick a bottle up, you start to learn, oh yeah, that's a one, and then that becomes automatic habit. But it's creating those habits and understanding what things we should and shouldn't be buying. So it gets easy eventually, I promise.
So to reiterate, it's 1, 2 or
5.
5.
Yeah.
Ignore the writing, because the writing lies. That's basically isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So I think following on from Paul's point, actually, if on the plastics recycling up at Ramsey, if you actually had a big sign that says, 1, 2 and 5 on the triangle, that would be really helpful, because we struggle with that. It says bottles.
Yeah.
But I kind of know that there are other shapes that are the same plastic, and we try and put them in.
So it just gives the message that it's bottles.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
So if you put the triangle of 1, 2 and 3, that would be really
I'm not
helpful.
sure whether man waste maybe do more. Might be worth speaking with
Yeah.
man waste. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They seem to take a lot of the, I deposit my plastic there as best as possible, and something you open up and, oh, should that be in there? Yeah. And I think a lot of people just do, they think it's plastic, or they'll take that. I think man waste actually do, they'll take as much as they are able to.
Really great.
Do they give you any feedback on?
People are trying to do their
Yeah.
best.
Yes, and other people,
The system,
Yeah.
anyway, excuse me.
I think that's the difficult thing with bring banks, is that as soon as something's contaminated, as Steph was saying, the whole thing will be contaminated. So by sorting it at source, so like we do with like boxes, you can control that contamination, because if there's a whole big skip that's full of any sort of plastic, and then you end up with a pizza in it, which I've seen before, things like that, it will contaminate the whole the whole skip, so to speak. But definitely, something man waste should be
Yeah.
able to help.
Do you get any
Right.
feedback on your
Right.
on your contamination levels?
no.
Okay, it might be worth asking.
Yeah, Jake could do that probably.
I was just interested in the first slide where textiles
Yeah,
are using the most energy or whatever to
yeah,
produce.
carbon, yeah.
And we all send stuff off to the charity shop. But I, having had some experience through people who work in charity shops, never send anything that's not perfect. But obviously you end up with clothes and textiles that are imperfect, rips, tears, stains, etc. Are we relying on the third sector, i.e. charities, to sort it and then they send it off bags to rags, or is there something more we could do in collecting textile waste that isn't suitable for charity shops and then recycling, or is that going to be cost prohibitive?
I mean, when I came back to the Isle of Man, we had a scheme that was linked up with, I think it might still be, the Salvation Army. They have a big, massive textile recycling, or they used to have anyway, in Kettering. So they had various types of, they had products that they would give away, coats and things, and then they would have materials that would get bundled up and taken to developed nations, and they would have materials that they would shred so they could get the fibres that they could then make into other things. So, and the feedback that we were getting was, and it's something, if you look at some of the Let's Recycle websites, is that the quality of the fibres going into clothes now, because clothes have become so cheap, and I'm not naming Primark for any reason other than
Sheen.
it's very, very cheap. Fashion, 2 or 3 times a year, cheap as cheerful, it's very difficult to recycle those materials because they're such low-grade products. And they're trying to encourage people now to think more about using natural materials, about buying clothes from charity shops. So there's a big shop now opened in Liverpool, I saw, which is a very large second-hand shop. And it's some of the stuff that was around when I was young, the Marks and Spencer things, you got a kilt when it's down here and you wore it till it was up here, but it was really, really good. So it's a whole mindset change, and it's holding the fashion sector to account. And whether it's greenwashing, or whether it's because the consumers are asking for it, or whether it's because their investors are asking for it, but some of the big design houses now are realising that, I don't know the figures, but to make a pair of jeans is a huge amount of water, and it's normally in an area of the world that hasn't got a lot of clean water going, and chemicals as well for bleaching, and that just is not sustainable. So going back to your question, I know there's materials and there's textiles that you can't put in a charity shop, and I don't know whether the likes of the Salvation Army, for example, are still happy to take those to textile banks away for shredding and turning into things. They were struggling to find a route for their materials. It's a big issue in terms of getting rid of.
But it would seem to be one that needs to be focused on and resolved, because if we're choosing all the
It's a shame we
carbon
can't
and then
also
it's all
still.
going into burn, it just seems such a waste.
Yeah, you're right.
There must be someone working on a solution for it.
Like, so many people now don't even know how to sew, do they?
They-
Do you know, if you
yeah,
get ripping
repair
jeans,
things,
people
yeah.
will pop it in the bin, but how does people not know? Just grab the needle out, or just grab the sewing machine through it. Do you know, maybe there's something people could do in schools or something, because it was always quite a big thing. Maybe I was weird, but like mending things, or I'll take that up for you, or I'll fix that, give it here. Do you know, there's definitely something that could be done.
The wool, doesn't it, off the shore sheep? And it's worthless now virtually.
Yeah.
It costs the farmers so much money to try and get rid of their wool. You know, it's a pity we can't sort of get something going so the wool is reused and it's,
On Ireland, yeah.
you know, it's good quality and it'll be used forever and ever.
Yes. Graham, do you want to?
Yeah, just on that, our loft installation is made out of sheep's wool, so there are starting to be
Oh, well, that's good.
different uses for it.
Was that on Ireland, sorry?
No, we bought it off Ireland. But
Okay.
yeah, you can buy it. In the UK, they also use it to line footpaths, to where they're worn down by feet. Thanks very much for a great, really interesting talk, both Stephanie and Norman. I think everyone has an obligation to understand what happens with their waste, so that's why we filmed it tonight, and we'll share it so more people can see it. My question was for Stephanie. You talked about the incumbent carbon in the actual materials,
Yeah.
but are you able to assess the carbon footprint of the different recycling processes before you then decide which processes are worth doing, which ones aren't? Because you talked a lot
Very
about the
difficult,
fiscal costs and
Yeah.
that sort of thing, but obviously climate change is a big thing now. And one of my personal bugbears is when people say, oh, it's okay, it's a compostable cup, or it's okay, it's recyclable, because that's still got a carbon footprint in its production, and its use and its disposal.
It's not easy. I mean, the Zero Waste Scotland tool was something they've been using a lot in Scotland and developed for their SEPA over there. We approached them and said, look, we're an island. We don't have any leakage across boundaries. Would be a perfect example to actually look at of the schemes that are going at the moment, which is why it references disposal to the energy from waste plant. And what is the carbon impact of what we're doing? Now, life conspires against you. Lots of staff changes, COVID, changes in funding for their organisation. And they produced some work for us, but it by no means is something that we could ever use as a basis for big decision making. It's just indicative. But that's the one thing that we need to do. There's a fiscal cost and there's an environmental cost. And that environmental cost isn't just carbon, it's the sustainability. So it's trying to understand the difference between the two, and they're linked as well. And at the end of the day, you just got to make the best effort that you can to come up with some figures, and that's exactly what we tried to do. I mean, the environmental cost benefit of anything is difficult to put figures on, and particularly as an island when we export most of our materials, which is why we said let's try and go to the northwest of England, because then we know that we're keeping our transportation impact a lot less than if we were exporting things to down Cornwall or across to Europe. It's not an easy one, It's do we burn our plastics or do we recycle them? Discuss the benefits of energy production from low-grade plastics to actually recovering those and sending them to the UK, maybe, but not sending them to China. It's better actually not to have those plastics in the first place. But plastics as a product is brilliant because it saves lives. A hospital would not function without plastics and single-use plastics. But can we make them from a non-hydrocarbon? And that's where the research, it's really clever research is going now in terms of it's something that's like a plastic, but it's not made from a hydrocarbon. So there's an awful lot of creative stuff going on, and we will benefit from that. But in terms of choosing what we recycle and how we recycle, I think so long as you can say we have considered this, we've looked at our carbon impact, and the one thing for me is we shouldn't be driving around collecting an individual plastic bottle from one house and then driving another 2 miles and collecting that. So it's looking at how we set up our recycling schemes as well, and which is where the working together works better, because of not just the economies of scale financially, but in terms of the environmental side as well, and potentially moving away from the internal combustion engine for collection to maybe a horse and cart, which is better potentially than an electric car, because electric vehicles have to have lithium batteries, and then what do you do at the end of that life, or maybe hydrogen's coming up around the corner. So it's a real changing environment at the moment, and there's so much information out there. You just go, whoa, do I go circular economy or do I go, recycling? But as an island, we had to make a decision, and we had to be mindful that we have got that export issue, we have got the cost issue, and we don't benefit from the help that the local authorities would get in the UK in terms of covering the financial costs of that. That sort of. Yeah.
There's so much focus now, isn't there, on carbon footprint, and everyone's like, oh, can you calculate the carbon footprint? And if you actually just take a little step back and consider the ethical and moral implications of this, we're saying, oh, well, we're just not going to recycle, we're going to throw it all away, and we're going to continue to extract all this raw materials, damaging the natural environment. When actually, if we consider that, and let's not put numbers on it, how do you put numbers on the fact that we're damaging people's lifestyles, people's homes, we're effectively, you know, damaging people that we can't see because we think, oh, we'll just keep sourcing it from raw materials. So rather than putting a calculation on it, how do you calculate the damage that that's causing as well? Do you know, there's so many ways to think of it, but definitely that's one for me. I think, you know, there's a moral implication there for sure.
Ian, and then over there.
Just a quick,
Sorry.
no, you go.
Thanks very much. What sort of efforts are going on working with retailers to suggest that they don't ask that at the till they don't immediately suggest that somebody take a bag, do you want a bag? That happens with every major retailer I know, and certainly all the smaller retailers I know. There's no charge, I think, on certain smaller retailers offering a bag. And similarly with charging potentially a refundable payment for cans of and bottles of minerals and alcohol. What I just said, it's difficult to make those decisions as a small island like the Isle of Man, but we're working with the rest of the UK, for instance. So that's really working on the reduction front.
There's the deposit return scheme. Again, Scotland tends to be leading the way ahead of England on this, I think. They're working with some of the retailers on having those, you know, machines outside where you can get points if it's Tesco's or whatever. Any scheme you put in is going to have a cost of setting it up and managing it. And, you know, as an island, is it better that we focus on, you know, the education side in terms of explaining to people why they should recycle their bottles, making it more convenient, rather than trying to put in units which, I mean, obviously Tesco could put one in at this. I don't know whether they've even thought about that, rather than going down the route of trying to put deposit return schemes across the island. It's trying to incentivise people to change their behaviour, and there's many different...
Let me put it another way.
Yeah.
How about imposing a charge, which is or introducing a charge which actually reflects the cost of disposing of, recycling or whatever, the packaging that a particular product comes in.
I mean, that would be, I kind of guess, you'd be saying, can the Isle of Man introduce legislation to anything that comes over to the Isle of Man, put a levy on it?
Within the EU, I know we're not in the EU anymore, but...
Yeah. They do have it in the UK because the producers have got a responsibility to pay to get that material back. So, for example, if you're producing a bottle of Coke, for example, the manufacturer will say to the legislator, the regulator, we produced 1,000 bottles of Coke this year. We will pay the local authorities the equivalent to bring those materials back and recycle them. And that's what I was trying to say. In the UK, there are free take-back schemes for local authorities, and they're funded by the producers and under the producer responsibility.
So why aren't these schemes applying in the Isle of Man?
Well, they don't, but it's because we're an independent legal jurisdiction.
But I still ask the question.
So, I mean, the Isle of Man could look to introduce that legislation. Would it be cost effective? I don't know. Given the amount of a number of bottles out there that aren't being recycled, you'd have to look at the benefits of actually doing that, given finite resources, given the need to prioritise everywhere else. It's a balance, isn't it, about where you prioritise your work. It's like the single-use plastics. And that's been something that the government wanted to bring in as an initiative, which they have done. It took a lot of effort and time to get that in. If we were to replicate that across every single waste stream, would it be more beneficial than doing better education about people telling them to not buy plastics if they can, but then recycle those plastics or those bottles if they could?
Well, surely
hang on.
that is an element of education. Why do we charge for bags now in supermarkets? The education is every time you ask for a bag, instead of bringing your own, it costs you a pittance, I have to say. And I see young people in particular, younger people. To me, of course, virtually everybody is younger. Younger people seem to just immediately say, "Oh yeah, I'll have a bag," because they don't carry bags around with them. They don't bring bags.
I mean, some jurisdictions charge for people to get rid of their waste. I know in Guernsey they charge now, so you get charged per bag of waste that you throw out. In Ireland, your residual waste bin gets weighed and you get a service charge and you get that directly to your house and your recyclables are free. There's lots of examples out there, different examples of how to tackle the same problem. And that's something we haven't done yet as an island in terms of legislation or regulations. At the moment we have, you put your bin out, it gets taken away and it gets emptied and that goes onto your rate, so it's not an individual responsibility for paying for the waste that you throw. And that would be a political decision.
The bag charge would be a political decision. Is that right? The bag charge?
They do charge for bags now, don't they? Most.
No, I didn't have to pay.
Yeah, supermarkets.
Yeah, they tend to be subsidiaries of UK companies anyway that do that.
Sorry, the lady's been waiting very patiently at the back there.
It's a very similar comment to what you were saying, actually. I would say it was 20 years ago, travelling in Germany, looking at their recycle schemes. And when you bought things in supermarkets, you emptied all your packaging at that time. The supermarket took that packaging. You didn't take it somewhere else. The bottles you were charged for, and everybody brought their bottles back because the bottles were reused. And like you're saying, why are we thinking we need to recycle? Why are we not reusing the actual product so that you're not having to get the raw materials again and again and again?
You've got to start somewhere, yeah.
Reused, I don't know how many times, but then when you took it back, you were incentivised to take it back because first of all you were charged a little bit extra for it, and then you got that money back when you brought your bottles back. This is sort of 20 years ago, and you think, why have we not progressed?
It's a cultural thing, isn't it? We've got so used to buying things, using them and putting them in the bin, as opposed to in Germany. And it wasn't the panacea in Europe. They had big problems getting rid of the volumes of materials. They were under the Green Dot scheme, and they were fairly much overwhelmed, which is why the likes of China started saying, and India started saying, you're not importing any of your plastics, because there was an awful lot of contamination and material going into countries that then had to get rid of. And you might have seen some television programmes as carrier bags from the UK with plastics being burnt in open landfill sites in places. So you have to look behind what's actually on the surface. And like I said, there's no quick fix, there's no easy fix. We have to change the way our lives are. Personally anyway, it's not government policy, but we have to change the way we think about the world that we live in, sounding very high level, but it's actually not. It's going back to the rocks and the things that we grow and the decisions that we make when we buy things, and that will influence the things that people make. There's been a big move away from plastic bottles to bar soap now, and I've noticed that in a lot of the chemists, on the Isle of Man as well, the retailers now are aware that people are thinking about what they're buying, and it's, my children are at university age and a bit older, they think very hard now rather than buy plastic bottles or go and buy new clothes. They use a charity shop. So I think our young people in many respects are way ahead of us, and we're trying to sort of catch up with them, and maybe our systems, do we need to change our systems ahead of the changes in the manufacturers, reducing their packaging and making things more reusable? I think we need to do something on the Isle of Man to change what we're doing. I think it's very piecemeal and it's not very consistent personally, and that's where I think together we've got actually more chance of actually making a bigger difference.
I agree, kids are ace, like in schools and stuff. When you go around speaking with schools now, like kids are so clued up. There's definitely the future for that, and it is the culture change. We will see it come through because kids now are just amazing. They've learned so much, they know so much, it's really positive. That they are, my goddaughter's 6 years old, she calls herself environmentally conscious. And I think it will start to, culture shift for sure.
Michael.
Sorry, thank you. couple of things. One, mostly for Stephanie. I was kind of echoing the thing again about kind of recycling bottles. I think it's what you get used to, isn't it, as you say, and the cultural side of it. And I think, you know, if we implemented some of these things, the longer it was there, the more people get used to seeing them, the more people get used to using them. And it would take time, but and I think you'd have to give it time. But I think if they're there and they're used over time, it would change people's opinions. And as I was saying, you know, in places like Germany and Finland where I've seen it, you know, people, the price of each item, the price of the bottle is factored in. So you get 25p for your bottle, and the bottled item is 25p more than it would be otherwise. So it's all built in at that level, the cost is built in there and incentivised them that. And that kind of falls in with what you were saying about joined up kind of thing. So my question really is, when you're saying about the joined up effort, I've noticed on the island, like, there's a lot of very localised responsibility for like things like waste collection, bin men, recycling schemes, and it's very, very devolved. And I feel like it'd be much more effective and cost effective and efficient, much more, you know, usable if there was an island-wide kind of waste disposal scheme, island-wide bin men, island-wide this. And my question really is, what is being done? Is there any consideration being made into kind of amalgamating these systems and making them more cost effective and making recycling?
Yeah. Going back to your first point, I think what we desperately need is to know what's in people's bins before we start changing the system. Because if we hardly got any glass in the bin and people are recycling, there's hardly any need to put all of that effort into the deposit return scheme, let's be honest. So from my perspective, in terms of the cost, the resources, the effort, the changes in legislation, and it's only my opinion, it's not government policy, is actually once we know what the scale of the problem is in terms of what's in people's bins and what we need to get out, that's when we can start making the decisions about where we need to target, whether it's just education or just trying to make things a bit more simpler.
Is there a reason why that analysis hasn't been done?
It was planned for 2019 and then COVID hit, and then we just need to get to the point where in part of the waste strategy review we start to do that again. You know, you can't find out what your problems are unless you actually look, you know, and I'm a great person for going through bins. And very, very strange, I'm afraid, but it tells you a lot about people and their behaviour. In terms of the changing, I mean, that's obviously a politically driven discussion. I mean, Norman might know there's been numerous discussions over the years about changing local authority and government responsibilities and centralising waste collection and studies done. So it's not something that hasn't been thought about, it's just something that's not been progressed yet. And I don't know whether it's on the political agenda for this administration.
A quickie question. Over the years in my garden shed, I've accumulated tins of paint, emulsion, creosote. How does one dispose of these? What's the score?
We do accept paint out on the Civic. There's a container there for reuse. So people can come along and say, yeah, I could do with that, and it can be reused by someone else.
Much of it's dead now, you know what I mean? I've had it there 20 years probably.
Ultimately then, what will tend to happen is that will, if it's a metal can, it could be used in the scrap, but right. A lot of the containers now are plastic, and that will tend to go into the burnable.
Okay.
But the guys will encourage people to put it in that container first to see if people do want a particular colour paint or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask about finances? As Norman said, CETA or Suez charge the local authorities, and presumably the bin collections is then receive everything at the energy from waste plant. They presumably sell the electricity to the Max Electricity Authority. Do we know how much it costs to run the energy across the island, run the energy from waste market?
Suez don't charge anybody. Suez have a contract. The Department of Infrastructure is its only customer. So the gate fees are set by the Department of Infrastructure, and we have a contract with Suez to operate the plant. I think the net costs are about £4.9 million, £5 million a year. Don't quote me on that, it's ballpark in terms of what it costs to run the plant.
So it's the government that charges the local authority?
Yes,
right?
yeah. And yes, they do sell the electricity, but it's a fixed price that the MU pay Suez and the Department of Infrastructure, so it's both of us that get paid for that.
So is that price, if it's a fixed price, is that now less than the current price for electricity? Because that's gone up quite a lot.
Yes.
Mistake in hindsight?
I can't comment. It was a contract that was written a long time ago, in about 1999. So obviously the world has changed a lot. They're having discussions. They're having discussions.
Any other questions? Anybody else? Yeah.
We all seem to accumulate, as you were saying, a huge amount of cardboard. Newspapers and magazines seem to be, that's pretty well organised, and I understand from what you were saying that that's quite valuable in terms of getting money back in your work. But in terms of cardboard, that presumably is just burned.
Not with me.
Not by
We
you.
collect,
Oh,
no, we
sorry,
collect off.
there is also a company, I don't know, besides yourselves, there is a company that actually does collect cardboard, doesn't it?
Yep, commercially there's a couple, so like the Prospero Group do, Man Waste Recycling Whale. You can actually get, especially with the likes of Amazon driving up the price of cardboard, you can actually get quite a good return of cardboard on the market at the moment.
But that presumably, does that go to the UK?
Yes.
Right. So cardboard is actually, in the right form, is a superb material for composting.
Yes, mix your browns and your greens, yeah.
Either laying it, you have to have a garden, obviously, to use it, but certainly as a material to rot down. But an idea just came to me that if you were able to go somewhere or get the material shredded into, in much the same way as you stick a piece of paper into a shredder and it comes out with very fine material, if you stick it on a compost heap, that degrades very much more quickly than if you just stick a large chunk of cardboard onto a compost heap. That facility could be on island. Yes, it would use power, but it would be on island. It could be on island, and that could generate, I don't know, bales of shredded cardboard, which would be very valuable, certainly from my point of view, to boost my my compost heap. I always have a problem getting the carbon-nitrogen balance right. We always have far too much nitrogen from cutting the grass and not enough carbon. So if that material were available to me, I'd go and buy.
It comes back to looking at waste streams and knowing that on the island we'll never be big enough to have a paper mill or a smelting plant or a battery recycling, but there's micro businesses, and it will never solve all the cardboard problem, but somebody with a bit of entrepreneurial skills, obviously market testing, because obviously you couldn't be their sole customer, so they'd need to know that they were making a product that other people want, which is going to offset them buying something else, and that's what the whole recycling thing's about. I mean, I know looking at a lot of other islands, it is the micro business side of things, like the wool, for example. It's never maybe going to take all the sheep's wool, but it might be something they could turn into an insulation, and it's the investment in that, and it's all the business development side. So it always sounds very simple, doesn't it, to get away, but it's actually a lot more complicated. But you're right. Yeah, the scales over here will probably be micro business rather than, as I said, changing the world.
Question I had.
Sorry to interrupt. What do they do at Ballynevin? Is that
I don't
just green?
Yeah.
St. John's?
Yeah, I think so.
They don't take cardboard, do they?
No, not I'm aware of.
Just on that, we've been doing a bit of an experiment with compost for the Gardeners' Fair next year for MWT.
Yeah.
And Jackie and Joe and Ian have been looking at different sorts of non-peat compost.
Yeah.
And Ballynevin, they are, just do a little plug for them, they collect from the Civic Amenity sites and I think from gardeners, and effectively and they've been going at this, I know the site's been there a long time, but apparently only the last 18 months the current incumbents are there, and they're going to be investing, or they have invested in a bagging plant. So hopefully that compost will be available for sale in shops across the island. And you know, the jury's out on how good it is compared to others, but certainly it's worth looking into, and it's on Ireland, and it is an alternative to a and make sure now, okay, it's going to be banned in the UK from 2024, I think, but even so, people need to be making that adjustment now, and there are lots of non-peat products out there which we can try. And I'll just ask a question for somebody who's had to go. It's a very quick one before I come back to you, Lamara, which is why don't you have cardboard recycling at the Northern Ministry?
Space.
Just space.
It is space. We could do the bigger sites. So we if you're going to have the cardboard, you need a baler.
Okay.
That needs to be under cover.
Oh, I think you said before it gets wet.
And then if once it's baled, you need to keep it under cover and stop it getting wet and soggy and horrible.
Okay. Last question, Lamara, you had your hand up.
I have a short two-part question. So to
I
everybody.
don't know, two parts.
So the first one is, should we be recycling more? Yes or no answer's fine. And then the second answer, if you've answered yes to the first one, is what's the one thing you would change to make recycling rates increase on the island? Short and sweet.
Steph, do you want to kick off?
At the moment, yes, we should be recycling more because I'm pretty sure there's stuff in the bin that shouldn't be going in there. We just hear them in the bin while getting into, particularly glass and stuff like that. One thing I change in terms of, I think, joined up stuff. Consistency and joined up and education. That's three things.
So would that be governmental?
It's everybody.
Basically?
It's everybody. We need to start working together a lot more.
I'd say yes, and I'd say make it easier and more convenient for everyone, which is why I'd say curbside recycling is certainly the way forward to increase recycling rates.
Yeah, we got to recycle, but unfortunately, we don't recycle on the island. We sort. Recycling happens elsewhere, across the sea. So it's a case of let's get the idea between recycling and let's sorting our sources. That's what we do at the Civic community. We sort it, we send it to someone who will then send it away to recycle. The biggest problem we got is the educational side. There's people, and also people's perception. It's easiest to put it in your bin rather than head out to the Civic community. So your glass, your cans will go in your normal bin. That's the easiest.
You did make a point before the meeting started that an awful lot of people don't have cars.
Yes, yeah.
And actually can't get
yeah.
to an impact, although presumably
and that's where
friends who have cars.
It's definitely a working together thing. Do you know, it's not easy to set this whole scheme up. Do you know, it's taken a lot of hard work. It is difficult. Working together is incredibly important, but it's also people's buy-ins. It's people wanting it, and if it comes about, will they take it up? So it's about encouraging people to say, look, this is the right thing to do, and then just working together to drive that forward, but definitely making it easy for people. As you said, like a lot of our people can't drive, you know, they're disabled or something like that. You know, that everyone wants to have a part and they want to play a part. So we should encourage everyone to be able to take a part of it from the home, essentially.
What are you actually doing about deterring this non-biodegradables coming to the island in the first place? Because if you could find some way of deterring it or getting the people who send it to make it biodegradable, then you could cut down all of the things you're talking about.
Totally true.
So what effort are you putting into that side of it is my question.
I think we have to rely on the producers in the UK to make that decision. I think it's a far bigger issue than the Isle of Man can solve.
Have you ever tested the mentality of the people who live over there? They're the people who, when they want a generator that needs servicing regularly, they put it on a big pole out to sea. You know, that's the sort of people you're dealing with.
But I think we're talking about the Isle of Man and what we have to do. You know, where do we buy our stuff? We go to the Tesco's, we go to the M&S, we go to those places.
I agree.
They're bringing the materials in, and although yes, it would be lovely for us to say no, we're not going to have that because you haven't done it properly. I think most of the population here wants to have that choice of of supplier, and so we are actually reliant on, whether we like it or not, the other island to actually bring in that legislation. But we can do a lot with that. There are an awful lot of things that we can actually join, write to, be involved with to make that happen in the UK as well. And that then we benefit from it, don't we? But we all have to start off. Fundamentally, we need to do it ourselves. And I think that is just got to be the starting point. And if we're not doing it already, then, you know, please let's start and let's encourage others to do the same. I'll close it there because I'm conscious of time. Can I thank you all very, very much for coming. It was lovely to see you, and thank you so much for your questions. Thank you very, very much to our panel. Stephanie, fantastic. Thank you very much, Clara, and Norman. So thank you all for coming, giving up your time.